Hello fellow cinephile. So today I'm going to do a spoiler review of Glass. So before I begin, if you haven't seen this film, it's best to go and watch it and stop watching this video. So if you want to see it and don't want to be anything to be spoiled, then maybe not watch this review. Anyway, here we go. I like how the movie reintroduced David Dunn and Mr. Glass. I like that things had changed for Dunn. That he's no longer a security guard, he owns his own security business. And it also looks at the idea that his son works with him at the business and his wife has died. But he's still being the hero that he began to be in Unbreakable. He's ultimately punishing the wicked. And I really like that aspect to him. I like he's a bit older, he's not as young as he used to be, and he doesn't have the abilities he used to have. He still has the strength, but he's winding down in years. And I think it's a kind of interesting look at it. It's kind of the idea of what if Superman got old, what would that be like for him? Would he lose his abilities? Would it be much harder and difficult for him to do what he does? And it sort of looks at Elijah Price, obviously Mr. Glass by Sam Jackson, and it looks at how he's been in a mental institution for 18 years, and he's heavily medicated most of the time because they're scared that he might break out or do something to destroy. The main thing I really liked was that M. Night introduced the idea of what if these particular characters didn't have the powers they believe they had, that they are not the heroes they think they might be. What if it's all a psychological thing and they're not at all what they seem or think they are? They've brainwashed themselves to be this. And I think that's a very interesting question that it asks. And it makes you start to think. You as a viewer starts to question whether they do have these abilities or how they've imagined them themselves. You as a viewer start to doubt them as well as them doubting themselves. And I think this is kind of an interesting take on that idea and taking a superhero movie and doing something different. See, what I also really like is how M. Night ultimately makes his own sort of superhero idea, and he grounds it in a realistic sort of way, and doing a different take on the superhero genre. It's refreshing to see something like this in a world that is saturated by comic books where heroes fight villains, heroes overcome villains, and ultimately save the world all the time, where this sort of takes a completely different look at it, and I like that aspect. So the idea is the film takes place 3 weeks after the events of Split. Kevin Crumb and the Beast have killed another lot of girls and he's kidnapped 4 more. And it's really about Dunn trying to track him down. That's been his main focus. Now the police are sort of closing in on Dunn because he's become known as a vigilante in a way. And they nickname him the Overseer, which I think is an interesting name. And I like how he's defined how he is a hero now in a way. Like when he enters a room, he turns the lights off and sort of hides in the shadows. And I kind of like that idea. Ultimately, he tracks down Kevin and he saves the 4 girls and they ultimately get into a fight. And this is the first time they've come face to face. And you actually get to see how strong Dunn actually is compared to the Beast. And the Beast is very strong as well. And there's some great back and forth between them and a really great fight sequence at the start, which ends with them falling out of a window. And this is ultimately where the film takes a little diversion. The police arrest, ultimately David Dunn and Kevin are taken into custody by the police and placed in a psychiatric hospital by Dr. Ellie Staple. Now this is played by Sarah Paulson. And ultimately it becomes this thing of her trying to convince all 3 men they are not the heroes they think they are and don't have the abilities they have just convinced themselves they have. And this is ultimately where a good chunk of the movie takes place within this psychiatric hospital. It really sets up the story and what's to come. There's a lot of foreshadowing and things explained within the hospital itself. And we start to look at these particular characters, and it's the first time all 3 of them are in a room together. And throughout the film, they really look at backstories of particular characters. We get to see the Dunn drowning that happened, that they talked about in Unbreakable, as a sort of a flashback sequence. And the whole thing with Kevin Crumb is the abuse that he suffered at the hand of his mother, and the fact that his father left and never returned, and he never quite worked out why. It looks at how these events shape them into the people they are today. There's things that transpire within the hospital. Ultimately, Dunn's put in a room where there's high pressure, there's nozzles and high pressure water can burst into the room at any time that they feel he's trying to escape or being confronting, which stops him, is ultimately his kryptonite. And for Crumb, or the Horde as he's called within the film, he's set up in a room where there's lights that flash every time he gets too close. And that sort of, it flicks him out of the personality he's occupying. And then another one appears. And the more it flashes, the more this happens. We get to meet more characters. As usual, McAvoy is absolutely amazing in this film. He does such a fantastic job. And we get to see so many more personalities than we did in Split. There's like 10 or 15 in this one, and he does a brilliant job at each. Ultimately, the doctor, Ellie Staple, has 3 days to convince these people that they're not superheroes. Otherwise, they'll be locked up for a long time. Ultimately, it also looks at her. She's not quite what she seems. And what she says a lot of the time isn't quite true. She's just sort of lying in a particular way. We learn out more about her, that she's part of a particular group that don't particularly like superheroes and are trying to stop them appearing, ultimately. I'll elaborate a bit more on that as I go through this review, but there's a bit more I want to talk about before. And this is where we see, ultimately, Elijah Price, Mr. Glass, where his brain's starting to work. And he's been a person who's been incarcerated for so long that he's sort of given up a bit. There seems no point, purpose to life, and can't see what there is to do. He is heavily medicated, so he's unable to act the way he normally would. David Dunn and the Horde appear in the hospital with him, and it gives him motivation and purpose. He wants ultimately these two to fight. He wants to break them out so they can fight and feel that he's able to have purpose again. The whole end of the film is meant to take place at this particular tower, that this fight's going to happen, so the whole world can see that these people do exist and they do have these abilities. But that's a misdirection. It's like a magician saying, this is what we're doing here, where they're doing something behind the scenes, and that's sort of what this is about. The end of it was never going to take place at the tower. Ultimately, it's about him recording what's going on and then uploading it to a particular site so everybody can see this happening. And this is something that this doctor and the group don't want to happen. What this film does a lot of ways as well is, like a lot of M. Night's movies, is hope in the film. The idea of working out who you truly are and accepting that is so entwined in this film, showing people that they are not alone and that it's okay to be who they are. Never doubt who they truly are. I think this is a great themes within it, and this is in a lot of his work, and especially within this trilogy. Why they're all in the hospital, there's sort of, I would call them sidekicks, but there's sort of loved ones come to see them in a way. You've got Joseph Dunn coming to see his father, and he's trying to get his father up on making up this story. His father is someone he looks up to, and he truly believes his father is this hero. And there's some really great interactions between him and Sarah Paulson in this film as well. And it really looks at Mrs. Price as well, Elijah's mother. And they got the actress back who played her, as well as David Dunn's son. Scenes with Elijah Price's mother, and she's talking about how she usually comes to see him once a week, and she just feels lately he's lost hope. He has no point and purpose, and he just feels like he's stuck there doing nothing and not serving any purpose at all. And it looks at Anya Taylor-Joy's character, Casey Cook, who returns to talk with the doctor, but also gets the opportunity to go and speak with the Horde. And it's sort of an interesting sort of thing, because you get to see her interact with different elements, different personalities. And she returns here and she gets to speak to Kevin once more, just by touching the Horde, or Kevin, as they call him, Kevin Crumb. He reappears, and they have a really great moment, and there's a great bond that's formed between these two characters from the events of Split. They really have this great bond with each other. And ultimately, even though it was a traumatic event that Casey went through, the Horde, or the Beast, or Kevin, or whoever you want to call him, was able to help her overcome something. He gave her the strength in a way, because she'd been through so many things. The Beast didn't kill her. She saw that she'd been through suffering and had been broken by many things. And ultimately, he gives her the motivation to stand up and say no to her uncle and stop him from abusing her in ways and putting him in jail and trying to get on with her life. But she feels very drawn to Kevin in such a way, even to the point that she's still wearing the jacket that he had. He was at the zoo, And it sort of shows you that she's still connected to this particular man in some way. And the jacket is a great metaphor for that connection. And she's really shaped by the events of Split, and it's turned her into quite a powerful and interesting character. She ultimately decides she wants to try and help Kevin, like the way he helped her. Ultimately, this all leads to Elijah's plan, and it unfolds as it goes. He and the Horde break out, and they give Kevin Dunn motivation to break out. Mr. Glass tells him that they're going to this tower and he's going to blow up the building there, and it's about Dunn trying to stop him. And this gives him the motivation to break out of his cell. And that's really what it's about. It's not really that he was going to blow up the tower at all. It's just this motivation to get Dunn going again. He really wanted to see these two fight. And he didn't care where it was, as long as they were able to interact and fight with each other out in public. So the third act and ending. This seems to be the point in the movie that people either love or hate. It seems this is the point that everybody talks about, how they hated the ending. They loved everything about it, but the ending really threw them. And I ultimately was one of those people too. It threw me to begin with. But when it got to the end of the film and I thought about it a bit more, it made a bit more sense. And I went and saw the film again, and it was the only ending that could actually happen, I believe, for the characters. And it served the story and the point and purpose of the story very well. So ultimately what happens in the third act is there's a big fight between David Dunn and the Horde. There's things that were revealed in this whole end sequence. And this sort of thing also costs Elijah his life, because he's ultimately hit pretty hard by the beast and cracks his sternum, and he ultimately dies. But the other thing that's really shocking about the ending is they ultimately kill off all the heroes. They kill off Elijah, they kill off David Dunn, and they kill off Kevin Crumb or the Horde. And that was quite a shocking thing. I didn't expect it to go that way. I thought at least David Dunn would survive and he would be our hero. But watching it again, it made sense within the storyline. Like in most superhero movies or comic book movies, the hero fights the villain. The hero overcomes the villain and becomes the victor. But in this is where this differs. This is set in the real world, where all the superhero stuff is, yes, it is on Earth with human beings and set present, but it's fiction. And where this is trying to ground in reality. And I think that was the point. They had to die, because there was no more for their characters to go or be. Like, say David Dunn overcame the Horde, then he'd be arrested and put in prison for murder. And then what would Elijah do? End up back in the mental institution, heavily medicated? And the Horde, what would he do? Say the Horde killed David Dunn, then he would be killed. So it sort of serves no purpose for them surviving, because it's not about them in the end. They showed others out there who might be the same as the three of them. They are not alone. It showed the world that people like this exist. It serves such a main purpose to this, and it's a great conclusion to the trilogy. Ellie Staples' character, we find out she's part of some secret group, and this group has been around for centuries. And what it does is it monitors people with abilities that rise, heroes and villains. And they say when one rises, the other one will rise. Then there's always some big fight and bad things happen, when this is where this group has to step in. And ultimately this group is responsible for the death of David Dunn, drowns him in a hole in the ground from water. The Horde gets shot by them, by a sniper in the stomach. And Elijah dies because of the impact he suffered from the beast. If they can't change them, which they tried to do, which he tried to do, they go to more extreme measures, and ultimately I think they end up killing them. And this is an introduction of another group into this world we don't know much about, but it sort of sets up the idea of a universe. I think this is a very powerful film and well done, and M. Night really returned what he does best, I think. Right at the end, there's some really great scene in a train station. Now, the train station is an important part of all these films in many ways. Like, you've got the train crash in the first film. Kevin becomes the beast that takes place within a train station as well. And the third, it ends in the train station. And they've uploaded this video online, and they're waiting for the reaction. And Elijah Price's mother says, we've finally been let in on the universe. And I think this is a great ending, and that it's okay to be different. And that's a big thing, that it's okay to be who you are. people struggling to find their purpose. And when you find your purpose and how great that is, and you can pursue what you want to do that way. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I think M. Night really pushed that in this film and did a really great job. I think people have got this film wrong. I think people have gone in this film with an expectation of it being one way, and it turns out to be completely different, and they don't like that. They want entertainment a lot of the time. They want it to be like a Marvel film, but it's not like that. It's definitely not your average superhero movie. It doesn't have the happy feel-good ending. None of the trilogy has, and that's the point of it. It is different. It makes you start to question your life. What are some things that happened to you that formed you into the person you become? And what if some of that turned you into a superhero or someone with abilities? What would you do and how would you experience it? And I think those are some great questions that it asks. I like this film because it's different, it's refreshing and interesting. There's a lot to it. There's a complexity to it, and the more viewings that you get, the more you get out of it. And it's definitely up there. So far for me, one of my favourite films of the year so far. And it's definitely going to be my top 10. So I'm going to give Glass 4.5 out of 5. That's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.